Resuming debate, the honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Speaker. Bonjour, good morning to all my colleagues today. It's a great pleasure that I rise to speak on Bill C-47, something that's important to all sides of the House. Mr. Speaker, the Arms Trade Treaty holds the record for the quickest entry into force of any arms control treaty. It is a sign of the great importance that the international community attaches to this treaty, that it reached the required number of ratifications required to enter into force so quickly. The ATT now has 91 state parties and a further 42 states that have signed on but not yet ratified the treaty. It is now time, Mr. Speaker, it is now time, I repeat that, Mr. Speaker, to add Canada to the number of state parties. Canada has long sought to advance export controls as a means of reducing the risks that can come from illicit trade in conventional arms. Joining the ATT, which calls on all its state parties to set up effective export controls, is a natural step. Canada's accession to the ATT will further demonstrate to Canadians, to all Canadians, from coast to coast to coast, and to the international community, our commitment to tackle the risks associated with irresponsible and illicit trade in conventional weapons. Canada, however, cannot fulfill the global aims of the ATT alone. Universalization of the ATT is essential to its success. The ATT, if broadly adopted internationally, can contribute substantially to global peace and security. Terrorists rely on access to arms largely from illicit or poorly controlled sources. Transnational crime both uses and profits from illicit arms trade. Conflict and instability is fueled by easy access to conventional weapons. All of these scenarios can and will be reduced, if not stopped, by preventing these weapons from being illegally traded or diverted. This is what the ATT aims to achieve. Ensuring that the treaty fulfills its promise requires the widest possible adherence and effective implementation around the world. It is important to note that the properly regulated arms trade does not prevent states from meeting their legitimate defense and security needs. The treaty recognizes that ensuring the treaty fulfills its promise requires the widest possible adherence and effective implementation around the world. It is important to note that properly regulated arms trade does not prevent states from meeting their legitimate defense and security needs. The treaty recognizes that there is a legitimate place for international arms trade when it is undertaken responsibly with carefully crafted controls. In accepting international norms for the transfer of arms, ATT state parties have struck a balance between national security interests, including legitimate uses of weapons, and the needs to address the consequences of unregulated trade in conventional weapons. Canada has a role to play, Mr. Speaker, in advancing the universalization of the Arms Trade Treaty. We have already begun to do so by participating as observer in meetings of ATT state parties and by supporting multilateral efforts to encourage states to ratify or accede to the ATT. Our work here today helps set an example for other states considering accession to the ATT. First and foremost, we are demonstrating our commitment to full implementation of the treaty. Accession to the ATT is a relatively straightforward process for Canada. We already conform to the spirit of the treaty and have strong export controls in place. However, our government realizes we need to do more. There are elements of the ATT that Canada does not yet fully meet, notably in regulating brokering, and we have not taken a firm position that we will not accede to the ATT until we are fully compliant with it. Secondly, we are committed to implementing the ATT in a manner that not only meets but exceeds the requirements of the treaty. Bill C-47 would further strengthen the rigor of our export controls to meet and indeed seek to exceed the obligations of the ATT. And, Mr. Speaker, we intend to share this experience with other states in forthcoming meetings of the ATT. However, leading by example is not enough, Mr. Speaker. All ATT states parties must establish a national system for the control of arms. They must strengthen their laws, regulations, and enforcement mechanisms. Our government recognizes that implementing new legislative systems and export controls can be difficult, particularly for states that may not have significant previous experience in this field. We are therefore, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, we are therefore committed to assisting other states who wish to join the ATT or who have become state parties but are unable to fully implement the treaty. The government has therefore contributed $1 million to the United Nations Trust Facility supporting cooperation on arms regulation. The UNSCAR is a multi-donor flexible funding mechanism to provide focused and effective support for the implementation of the Arms Trade Treaty and the UN Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons. Through this trust facility, Mr. Speaker, Canada is working with other international partners and with the UN to help states accede to and effectively implement the ATT. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that to date in several regions of the world where flows of conventional weapons contribute to high levels of conflict, there are still a low number of ATT state parties. The UN Trust Facility can also help these states improve their legislation and user controls and management of weapon stockpiles. Its focus on gender and children further supports the goals of the ATT and can make a real contribution to those who are too often the victims of illicit trade in conventional weapons. Of course, Mr. Speaker, accession to the ATT alone cannot stop illicit weapon flows, which is why our government has also partnered with the international NGO Small Arms Survey, contributing $224,000 to survey illicit weapons flow in the key region of the Libya-Chad-Sudan triangle. The survey is a starting point to implement concrete follow-on actions to reduce illicit arms flows along the pathways identified by the Small Arms Survey. In doing so, we will contribute concretely to reducing access to weapons in a region where these conventional arms undermine security and socio-economic development. We will also promote international security by cutting off flows of arms to terrorists and criminal groups in the region. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, Canada can only play an important role in promoting the universalization of the ATT. However, we can only do so if we take a leadership role, which our government is doing on a number of fronts, in countering the proliferation of conventional weapons and promoting strong export controls as a means of ensuring that legitimate trade in conventional arms is conducted responsibly, something that I'm sure all members of this House desire. It is therefore essential that we rejoin our international partners and allies in their collective effort through the Arms Trade Treaty. Canada needs to be at the table. It is time for Canada to promote internationally agreed standards for the arms trade that will reduce human suffering, help prevent arms from being used in serious violations and abuses of human rights and international humanitarian law, and, Mr. Speaker, combat terrorism and organized crime. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments?